Officer Bryant Kowalski squinted at the identification card, turning it over in his thick fingers like he was examining counterfeit currency. "That's not a real ID," he announced to his partner loud enough for the small crowd gathering behind the security checkpoint to hear. "The holographic seal looks off, and I've never seen this classification level before." Dr. Elena Vasquez stood quietly at the metal detector, her briefcase resting on the conveyor belt, watching as 3 more security personnel gravitated toward Kowalski's station. The morning shift change had created a bottleneck of personnel trying to enter the classified research facility, and now her presence had brought everything to a complete halt. Sergeant Rita Nakamura approached from the supervisor's desk, her radio crackling with routine check-ins from other checkpoints. "What's the holdup here, Bryant?" She took the card from Kowalski's hands, her expression immediately skeptical as she examined the unfamiliar markings and clearance codes. "Look at this classification," Nakamura said, holding the card up to the overhead fluorescent lights. "Level 9 access with some kind of executive override stamp. I've been doing security here for 8 years and never seen anything like this." She shook her head slowly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had processed thousands of legitimate credentials. Officer Webb moved closer from his position at the X-ray machine, leaving his post unmanned as curiosity drew him into the growing circle of doubt. "The plastic feels different too," he observed, reaching out to touch the card's surface. "Real government IDs have that specific texture from the lamination process. This one's too smooth." Elena remained motionless, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, watching the security team's examination with the patience of someone who had experienced similar situations before. Her plain gray business suit and unremarkable appearance had triggered exactly the response she expected at facilities like this one. Before we dive deeper into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed similar moments where someone's authority was questioned in your community. Kowalski pulled out his verification scanner, a handheld device that connected directly to the federal database system. "This should settle it quickly," he said, running the scanner over the card's magnetic strip. The device beeped once, paused for several seconds, then emitted a longer tone that none of the gathered officers recognized. "That's not the normal verification sound," Officer Torino observed from behind the group. He had abandoned his metal detector station as well, drawn by the unusual nature of the situation unfolding at Checkpoint 3. "When I scan legitimate cards, it gives 2 quick beeps and displays the green clearance confirmation." Nakamura frowned at the scanner's display screen, which showed a series of codes and clearance levels she had never encountered in her 8 years of facility security. "The system is requesting additional authentication protocols," she said, her voice taking on the tone of someone who had discovered a significant security concern. "I need to call this up to Chief Eldridge." Elena finally spoke, her voice calm and measured despite being surrounded by increasingly suspicious security personnel. "The additional authentication is standard for certain classification levels," she said simply. "You'll find that Chief Eldridge has the proper verification codes in his office safe." Webb laughed, a short sound that carried both disbelief and professional skepticism. "Ma'am, with respect, we've processed clearances for generals, admirals, and cabinet-level officials through this checkpoint. If there was a classification level above what we've already seen, we would know about it." The crowd behind Elena had grown larger as other personnel waited to clear security, their morning routines disrupted by the unexpected delay. Conversations buzzed with speculation about the woman whose credentials had brought the entire checkpoint operation to a standstill. Kowalski attempted the verification scan a second time, holding the card steady against the scanner's reader surface. The same unfamiliar tone echoed through the checkpoint area, followed by a display of codes that seemed to confuse the veteran security officer even more than the first attempt. "I'm calling Chief Eldridge down here," Nakamura decided, reaching for her radio. "This is either the most sophisticated fake ID we've ever encountered, or there's something about government clearance levels that 8 years of security work hasn't prepared me for." Elena checked her watch, noting the delay, but showing no signs of impatience or concern about the scrutiny her credentials were receiving. The morning sun streamed through the facility's reinforced windows, casting long shadows across the checkpoint area where 5 security officers continued their examination of identification they were increasingly certain had to be fraudulent. Sergeant Nakamura's radio crackled as she contacted the security office. "Chief Eldridge, we have a situation at Checkpoint 3 that requires your immediate attention. We have an individual with credentials that our system cannot properly verify." The response came back within seconds, Chief Eldridge's voice carrying the irritation of someone whose morning routine had been interrupted. "What kind of credentials, Rita? Are we talking about expired documentation or damaged magnetic strips?" "Neither, sir," Nakamura replied, glancing at Elena, who continued to stand calmly beside the metal detector. "The individual claims to have Level 9 access with executive override authorization. Our scanners are producing verification codes we've never encountered before." A long pause filled the radio silence before Eldridge responded. "Level 9 access? Rita, the highest classification we process through that checkpoint is Level 7, and that's only for the Pentagon liaisons who visit quarterly. Bring the documentation to my office immediately." Officer Hassan, who had just arrived for his shift, stopped mid-stride when he saw the crowd gathered around Checkpoint 3. "What's happening here?" he asked Webb, who was still examining Elena's identification card under the bright security lights. Webb shook his head, his expression a mixture of professional concern and growing certainty about what they had discovered. "We've got someone trying to enter the facility with what appears to be highly sophisticated counterfeit credentials. The ID claims classifications that don't exist in our security protocols." Elena observed the conversation between the security officers, noting how their initial skepticism was solidifying into confident conviction that they had uncovered a serious security breach. The morning rush of personnel entering the facility had created a backup of nearly 20 people, all waiting to clear the checkpoint while the situation unfolded. Hassan took the identification card from Webb's hands, running his fingers along the edges and examining the holographic elements under different angles of light. "I've processed thousands of these during my 12 years in facility security," he said with the authority of extensive experience. "The government uses specific manufacturing processes for legitimate credentials, and this doesn't match any of them." Kowalski retrieved a magnifying glass from his security station, focusing on the detail markings and serial numbers embedded in Elena's identification. "Look at this executive override stamp," he said, pointing to a small emblem in the corner of the card. "I've never seen anything like this symbol in any of our training materials or verification guides. The federal database should have flagged this immediately if it were legitimate," Torino added, watching as Kowalski attempted a third verification scan. "Our system connects directly to Homeland Security's central authentication network. If Level 9 access existed, it would be in their database." Elena remained silent, her hands still clasped in front of her, watching the security team's analysis with the detached interest of someone observing a predictable process. The facility's air conditioning hummed overhead, creating a steady background noise that mixed with the conversations of waiting personnel. Nakamura gathered Elena's identification and the scanner results, preparing to walk them to Chief Eldridge's office as requested. "Ma'am, I need you to remain here at the checkpoint while we verify your credentials through proper channels. Officer Webb will stay with you during the authentication process." "Dr. Vasquez," Elena said simply, providing her name for the first time since arriving at the security checkpoint. "And I understand the verification procedures completely. Take whatever time you need." Webb positioned himself near the metal detector, maintaining visual contact with Elena while the other officers continued their examination of her credentials. In his 15 years of security work, he had encountered various attempts to gain unauthorized access to classified facilities, but none with documentation this sophisticated. Hassan pulled out his smartphone and began photographing Elena's identification card from multiple angles. "Chief Eldridge will want detailed images for comparison with known counterfeit techniques," he explained to his colleagues. The FBI maintains databases of fraudulent credential patterns that we can cross-reference. The morning sun had shifted position, casting different shadows across the checkpoint area as the situation extended beyond what anyone had anticipated. Personnel waiting to enter the facility began checking their watches and expressing quiet frustration about the delay affecting their work schedules. Kowalski examined the scanner's display screen one more time, noting the unusual codes and authentication requests that had appeared during each verification attempt. "I've never seen the system respond this way to counterfeit credentials," he admitted to Webb. "Usually fake IDs either scan normally or produce immediate error messages." Torino nodded in agreement, his years of experience with security protocols adding weight to his observation. "The system seems to be trying to authenticate something it doesn't recognize rather than rejecting obvious forgeries. It's like the database knows this classification exists but can't provide standard verification." Elena checked her watch again, noting the 20-minute delay, but maintaining her composed demeanor despite being surrounded by increasingly confident security officers who believed they had uncovered a sophisticated attempt to breach facility security. The morning rush was creating longer lines at the other checkpoints as personnel were redirected around the ongoing investigation. Chief Marcus Eldridge's footsteps echoed through the security corridor as he approached Checkpoint 3, his expression already set with the grim determination of someone preparing to handle a serious breach of facility security. Behind him walked Deputy Chief Morrison and Security Analyst Kelly, both summoned to assist with what Nakamura had described as unprecedented credential fraud. Eldridge took the identification card from Nakamura's outstretched hand. His 23 years of government security experience immediately focused on examining what his team believed to be sophisticated counterfeit documentation. "This is definitely not standard government issue," he announced after 30 seconds of examination. "The holographic patterns are wrong, and this Level 9 classification doesn't exist in any federal security framework." Deputy Chief Morrison leaned over Eldridge's shoulder, studying the unfamiliar markings and symbols embedded throughout Elena's credentials. "I've worked with Department of Defense clearances for 18 years, he said with the confidence of extensive experience. "The highest classification in our system is Level 7, and that's reserved for Joint Chiefs and Cabinet members. Level 9 is completely fabricated." Security Analyst Kelly retrieved her tablet computer and began accessing the federal authentication databases, cross-referencing the codes and serial numbers visible on Elena's identification. "The manufacturing specifications don't match any known government contractor," she reported after several minutes of research. "The plastic composition, holographic elements, and magnetic strip encoding all deviate from established standards." Elena stood quietly beside the metal detector, observing the growing assembly of security personnel who were examining her credentials with increasing certainty about their fraudulent nature. The morning facility rush had created a significant backup, with over 30 personnel now waiting to clear security while the investigation continued. Eldridge handed the identification to Morrison for a second opinion, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had processed credentials for senators, generals, and intelligence directors. "In my entire career, I've never encountered documentation this sophisticated in its attempt to mimic legitimate government security clearances. Whoever created this invested serious resources in the forgery." Officer Kowalski approached the growing group of supervisors, carrying his verification scanner and the printout of error codes it had generated during multiple authentication attempts. "Chief, the system keeps requesting additional verification protocols that don't exist in our database. It's like the scanner recognizes something, but can't complete the authentication process." Morrison examined the scanner results, his frown deepening as he studied the unfamiliar codes and authentication requests. "Our system connects directly to the central security database maintained by Homeland Security," he explained to the assembled officers. "If these credentials were legitimate, the verification would be immediate and unambiguous." Kelly looked up from her tablet research, her expression reflecting the confidence of someone who had discovered definitive evidence. I've cross-referenced the executive override stamp with every known government symbol and authorization mark in the federal database. This particular emblem doesn't appear in any official documentation or security manual. Sergeant Nakamura positioned herself closer to Elena, maintaining the professional demeanor required when detaining someone suspected of attempting unauthorized facility access. Ma'am, given the irregularities we've discovered with your identification, I need to inform you that you're being detained pending verification of your credentials through additional security channels. Elena nodded calmly, her response devoid of the surprise or protest that typically accompanied such announcements. I understand your procedures completely, Chief Eldridge. You're following exactly the protocols you should follow when encountering unfamiliar documentation. Eldridge studied Elena's composed reaction, noting that most individuals attempting facility access with fraudulent credentials either became defensive or showed signs of nervousness when confronted by multiple security supervisors. Her calm acceptance of the detention struck him as unusual, but didn't diminish his certainty about the identification's fraudulent nature. Hassan continued photographing the identification from various angles while Webb documented the scanner error codes for inclusion in the security incident report. The FBI counterintelligence unit will want detailed analysis of the forgery techniques, Hassan explained to his colleagues. This level of sophistication suggests organized criminal activity or foreign intelligence involvement. Morrison retrieved his secure communication device and began placing calls to higher-level security authorities who specialized in credential fraud investigation. We need to involve the Regional Security Office and possibly federal investigators, he told Eldridge. This represents the most sophisticated attempt to breach facility security we've encountered. The crowd of waiting personnel had grown restless as the investigation extended into its second hour, with many checking their phones and expressing frustration about the delay affecting their morning work schedules. Several senior researchers approached the checkpoint to inquire about the holdup, but were directed to use alternative entrances. Kelly finished her database research and approached Eldridge with her findings printed on official security letterhead. Chief, I've confirmed that Level 9 access classification doesn't exist in any federal, military, or intelligence security framework. The highest documented clearance level is 7, and that requires presidential authorization for issuance. Eldridge examined Kelly's research results, his conviction about the identification's fraudulent nature now supported by comprehensive database verification. The evidence is conclusive, he announced to the assembled security team. We're dealing with extremely sophisticated counterfeit credentials designed to gain unauthorized access to classified government facilities. Security Supervisor Jenkins arrived from the main administrative building, summoned by Deputy Chief Morrison to provide additional expertise in credential fraud investigation. His 30-year career had included assignments with the Secret Service and Treasury Department, giving him experience with the most sophisticated forgery techniques employed by criminal organizations and foreign intelligence services. Jenkins took Elena's identification from Chief Eldridge, immediately focusing his examination on the microprinting and embedded security features that distinguished legitimate government credentials from even the most advanced counterfeits. The holographic elements show unusual depth and complexity, he observed, tilting the card under the checkpoint's bright fluorescent lighting. But the manufacturing process doesn't match any contractor approved for classified document production. Dr. Vasquez, Morrison addressed Elena directly, his tone reflecting the serious nature of the security breach they believe they had uncovered. Given the sophisticated nature of these fraudulent credentials, we need to understand how you obtained them and what your intentions were in attempting to access this classified facility. Elena maintained her composed stance, her hands still clasped in front of her, showing no signs of distress despite being surrounded by 8 security personnel who had reached unanimous agreement about her credentials' fraudulent nature. As I mentioned earlier, the verification protocols for certain classification levels require additional authentication that Chief Eldridge can access through his office systems. Kelly retrieved a magnifying device from the security equipment cabinet, joining Jenkins in examining the minute details of Elena's identification under high-powered magnification. The serial number format doesn't conform to any known government numbering system, she reported after several minutes of detailed analysis. Legitimate credentials follow specific alphanumeric patterns established by federal manufacturing standards. Eldridge contacted the regional FBI field office through his secure communication line, speaking in the measured tones of someone reporting a significant security incident. We have an individual in custody attempting facility access with extremely sophisticated counterfeit federal credentials, claiming Level 9 classification. The documentation quality suggests organized criminal or foreign intelligence involvement. Sergeant Nakamura escorted Elena to a secure waiting area adjacent to the checkpoint, a small room typically used for processing individuals whose credentials required additional verification. The room's single window overlooked the facility's main courtyard, where morning operations continued normally despite the security situation unfolding at the entrance. Jenkins completed his examination of the identification and approached the group of security supervisors with his assessment. In my 3 decades of experience with document fraud, this represents the most sophisticated attempt I've encountered. The forgers invested considerable resources in replicating authentic government security features while creating fictional classification levels. Morrison documented Jenkins' expert opinion in the official security incident report, noting the unprecedented nature of the attempted breach and the level of sophistication involved in creating the fraudulent credentials. The FBI counterintelligence unit will want to interview the subject and analyze the forgery techniques for potential national security implications. Officer Webb monitored Elena through the waiting room's security camera, observing her calm demeanor and lack of nervous behavior typically exhibited by individuals caught attempting unauthorized facility access. She's not showing any signs of stress or concern about being detained, he reported to Chief Eldridge. Most people with fake credentials become agitated when confronted by multiple security supervisors. Hassan continued his photographic documentation of the identification, ensuring that every security feature and marking was captured for forensic analysis by federal investigators. The executive override stamp appears to be created with government quality equipment, he noted, but the symbol itself doesn't appear in any official authorization database. Kelly's tablet research expanded to include international security databases, checking whether the unusual markings on Elena's credentials matched any foreign intelligence document formats. The holographic patterns don't correspond to any known domestic or international government security standards, she reported after extensive cross-referencing. Eldridge reviewed the comprehensive evidence gathered by a security team, satisfied that they had properly identified and contained a serious attempt to breach facility security using extraordinarily sophisticated fraudulent documentation. The evidence is overwhelming, he announced to his assembled staff. We're dealing with credentials designed to deceive even experienced security professionals. Torino approached the group with additional scanner results, having attempted verification using backup systems and alternative authentication protocols. Every system produces the same error codes and authentication failures, he reported. The magnetic strip contains data that our scanners recognize but cannot properly decode or verify. Jenkins examined the scanner error codes with the expertise gained from decades of investigating credential fraud for federal agencies. These particular error patterns are unusual, he admitted to Eldridge. Typically, counterfeit credentials either scan normally using stolen data or produce immediate rejection errors. This documentation seems to be requesting verification protocols that don't exist in our systems. The facility's morning operations had adjusted to accommodate the security situation, with personnel directed to alternative entrances while Checkpoint 3 remained dedicated to the ongoing investigation. The backup had largely cleared, but the detention had attracted attention from facility administrators who began inquiring about the nature of the security incident. Morrison contacted the facility director to brief him on the situation and request authorization for extended detention pending arrival of federal investigators. Sir, We have contained an individual attempting access with level 9 classification credentials that appear to be extremely sophisticated counterfeits. The subject claims the documentation is legitimate despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Elena remains seated in the waiting room, occasionally glancing through the window at the facility courtyard, but showing no signs of impatience or concern about the extended investigation of her credentials. Her briefcase remained on the security conveyor belt, unopened pending completion of the authentication process that 8 experienced security professionals were convinced would ultimately prove her identification fraudulent. Facility Director Dr. Patricia Henley arrived at Checkpoint 3, her expression reflecting the serious concern of someone whose classified research installation had potentially been targeted by sophisticated criminal activity. She examined Elena's identification alongside Chief Eldridge, her 15 years of overseeing government security operations providing additional expertise to the growing investigation. Dr. Henley, Eldridge briefed her on the situation. This represents the most advanced credential forgery attempt we've encountered. The subject claims Level 9 access authorization, which our comprehensive database research confirms doesn't exist in any federal security framework. 8 experienced security professionals have independently verified the fraudulent nature of the documentation. Henley studied the identification under the checkpoint's examination lights, noting the unfamiliar symbols and classification markings that had convinced the entire security team of its counterfeit nature. The manufacturing quality is extraordinary, she observed, but Level 9 classification would require authorization levels that simply don't exist within our government structure. Special Agent Rodriguez from the FBI Regional Office contacted the facility through secure communication channels, requesting detailed briefings on the suspected security breach. His voice carried the authority of someone who specialized in investigating attempts to infiltrate classified government installations using fraudulent credentials. Agent Rodriguez, Chief Eldridge provided the comprehensive briefing. We have detained an individual attempting facility access with sophisticated counterfeit credentials claiming classification levels that exceed anything in federal databases. Our security team has documented extensive evidence of fraud, and the subject maintains the documentation is legitimate despite overwhelming proof to the contrary. Jenkins completed additional examination of Elena's identification using specialized equipment designed to detect even the most advanced forgery techniques. The holographic security features demonstrate manufacturing capabilities that would require significant financial investment, he reported to Director Henley. This suggests organized criminal activity rather than individual fraud attempts. Security analyst Kelly expanded her database research to include classified government systems, accessing security databases typically reserved for investigating potential foreign intelligence operations. The executive override symbols don't match any classified authorization marks in restricted federal databases, she confirmed to the assembled security leadership. Deputy Chief Morrison initiated lockdown protocols for the checkpoint area, restricting access while federal investigators prepared to arrive and assume control of what had been classified as a potential national security incident. The sophisticated nature of the fraudulent credentials suggested involvement by organizations with substantial resources and technical capabilities. Elena observed the escalating response through the waiting room's security window, watching as additional personnel arrived and security measures intensified around Checkpoint 3. Her composed demeanor remained unchanged despite the growing conviction of multiple security experts that she had attempted to breach classified facilities using elaborate counterfeit documentation. Director Henley contacted the Pentagon Security Liaison Office to report the incident and request guidance on handling attempts to access classified facilities using fictional security clearances. The Level 9 classification claim represents a new development in credential fraud techniques, she explained during the secure communication. Hassan documented every aspect of Elena's identification using high-resolution photography equipment, ensuring that federal investigators would have detailed images for forensic analysis and comparison with known counterfeiting techniques. The quality of the forgery suggests access to government-grade manufacturing equipment, he noted while completing the photographic evidence collection. Agent Rodriguez confirmed his estimated arrival time and requested that the scene be preserved exactly as discovered, with all original scanner results and authentication attempts documented for federal analysis. This case demonstrates sophistication levels that require specialized counterintelligence investigation, he informed Chief Eldridge during their secure communication. Jenkins reviewed the comprehensive evidence gathered by the security team, satisfied that their investigation had properly identified and contained a serious threat to facility security. The documentation quality exceeds anything we've encountered in 3 decades of credential fraud investigation, he reported to Director Henley. This represents organized criminal activity with significant financial backing. Torino attempted verification using alternative government databases, accessing systems designed to authenticate credentials from multiple federal agencies and military branches. Every database produces identical authentication failures, he reported after extensive verification attempts. The magnetic strip contains data patterns that no government system can properly decode. Kelly consulted with cybersecurity experts at the Department of Homeland Security, requesting analysis of the unusual scanner error codes and authentication patterns generated by Elena's identification. The technical specialist confirmed that the error patterns didn't match any known government credential formats or recognized counterfeiting techniques. Morrison completed the detailed incident report required for federal investigation, documenting the timeline of events, expert assessments, and evidence gathered during the comprehensive examination of the fraudulent credentials. The report emphasized the unprecedented sophistication of the forgery and potential national security implications. Director Henley reviewed the security protocols being implemented, ensuring that the facility remained fully operational while the investigation continued. The checkpoint incident had attracted attention from other government installations, with security chiefs requesting briefings on the new counterfeiting techniques to enhance their own fraud detection capabilities. Eldridge coordinated with federal authorities to establish the proper chain of custody for Elena's identification and all associated evidence, recognizing that the sophisticated nature of the forgery would require specialized forensic analysis by counterintelligence experts. The case had evolved beyond routine credential fraud into a potential matter of national security significance. Elena remained seated in the secure waiting room, occasionally checking her watch but maintaining the same calm composure she had displayed throughout the 2-hour investigation. Her briefcase continued to rest on the security conveyor belt, its contents unknown pending completion of the authentication process that 9 security experts were absolutely certain would prove her credentials fraudulent. Special Agent Rodriguez arrived at the facility accompanied by Senior Investigator Davis from the FBI's Counterintelligence Division, both men carrying specialized equipment designed for analyzing sophisticated document fraud attempts. Their immediate presence elevated the checkpoint investigation to federal jurisdiction, with local security personnel now supporting rather than leading the examination process. Agent Rodriguez examined Elena's identification using forensic tools typically reserved for investigating foreign intelligence operations and organized criminal activities targeting classified government installations. The manufacturing quality demonstrates access to equipment and techniques that suggest significant financial backing, he observed while documenting every security feature under high-powered magnification. Senior Investigator Davis connected his portable authentication system to the facility's federal database network, attempting verification through classified channels not accessible to standard security personnel. The system's producing error codes we've never encountered in 15 years of counterintelligence investigation, he reported after multiple authentication attempts using various federal verification protocols. Director Henley briefed the federal investigators on the comprehensive examination conducted by her security team, emphasizing the unanimous conclusion reached by 9 experienced professionals that Elena's credentials represented extraordinarily sophisticated counterfeit documentation. The Level 9 classification claim exceeds any known federal security framework, she explained while presenting the detailed evidence gathered during the 3-hour investigation. Elena remained in the secure waiting room under federal supervision, her continued calm demeanor noted by Agent Rodriguez as unusual for individuals caught attempting facility infiltration using fraudulent credentials. Most subjects become increasingly agitated as the investigation intensifies, he mentioned to Davis while observing Elena through the security monitoring system. Davis attempted verification using specialized federal databases maintained by the Central Intelligence Agency and National Security Agency, systems designed to authenticate credentials for personnel operating at the highest levels of government security clearance. The identification's data patterns don't match any known government format, he confirmed after extensive database cross-referencing. Jenkins provided his expert assessment to the federal investigators, summarizing 3 decades of experience with document fraud examination for the Secret Service and Treasury Department. This represents the most sophisticated forgery attempt I've encountered in my entire career, he stated with conviction. The resources required to produce documentation of this quality suggest organized criminal or foreign intelligence involvement. Security analyst Kelly presented her comprehensive database research to Agent Rodriguez, documenting extensive searches through federal, military, and intelligence security frameworks that confirmed Level 9 classification didn't exist in any official capacity. The executive override symbols are completely fictional, she reported while displaying her research results on the facility's secure computer system. Rodriguez contacted FBI headquarters to request additional technical support for analyzing the unusual authentication patterns generated by Elena's identification. The error codes suggest the documentation contains data that federal systems recognize but cannot properly decode, he explained during the secure communication with his supervisors. Chief Eldridge coordinated with federal authorities to maintain facility security while the investigation continued, recognizing that the sophisticated nature of the attempted breach had attracted attention from multiple government agencies. The Department of Homeland Security has requested briefings on the new counterfeiting techniques, he informed Director Henley during their status update meeting. Davis examined the scanner error codes generated during previous verification attempts, noting patterns that didn't conform to typical counterfeit credential responses. Fraudulent documentation usually produces immediate rejection errors or false positive authentication, he observed to Agent Rodriguez. These particular error patterns suggest something unusual about the data encoding. Morrison documented the federal investigation's findings for inclusion in the facility's security incident report, noting that FBI counterintelligence specialists had confirmed the fraudulent nature of Elena's credentials using specialized authentication systems not available to local security personnel. The case had become a matter of significant federal interest due to the sophisticated forgery techniques employed. Agent Rodriguez attempted authentication using emergency verification protocols designed for situations involving potential foreign intelligence operations, accessing classified systems that could theoretically authenticate credentials for deep cover operatives or specialized government personnel. The emergency protocols are producing the same authentication failures, he reported to Davis after completing the specialized verification attempts. Hassan provided the federal investigators with comprehensive photographic documentation of Elena's identification, ensuring that forensic analysis could be conducted by specialized laboratories equipped to examine sophisticated counterfeiting techniques. The Bureau's technical laboratory will analyze every aspect of the manufacturing process, Agent Rodriguez explained while securing the photographic evidence. Kelly expanded her research to include historical security databases, checking whether similar credential patterns had appeared in previous counterintelligence investigations or foreign intelligence operations targeting classified facilities. The authentication symbols and classification levels don't match any documented patterns in historical fraud cases, she confirmed after extensive archival research. Davis contacted the National Security Agency's technical division to request analysis of the unusual data patterns contained in Elena's identification, recognizing that the sophisticated encoding might require specialized cryptographic examination. The magnetic strip contains information that standard government systems cannot properly interpret, he explained during the secure communication. Senior investigator Davis completed his preliminary assessment for FBI headquarters, documenting the extraordinary sophistication of the fraudulent credentials and recommending expanded investigation into potential organized criminal or foreign intelligence involvement. The case represents a new level of sophistication in attempts to infiltrate classified government facilities, he concluded in his initial report. Elena continued to wait patiently in the secure room, her composed demeanor unchanged despite being the subject of an intensive federal investigation involving multiple agencies and specialized counterintelligence personnel. 4 hours had elapsed since her arrival at the checkpoint, yet she showed no signs of concern about the escalating response to her credentials that 10 security experts and 2 federal investigators were absolutely certain represented sophisticated criminal fraud. Assistant Director Walsh from FBI headquarters arrived via emergency helicopter, his presence indicating that the sophisticated credential fraud had attracted attention at the highest levels of federal law enforcement. His 28 years of counterintelligence experience included investigations of the most advanced foreign intelligence operations targeting classified American facilities. Director Walsh examined Elena's identification using equipment specifically designed for analyzing state-sponsored forgery operations, technology typically reserved for investigating attempts by hostile nations to infiltrate critical government installations. The manufacturing sophistication exceeds anything we've documented in our comprehensive database of international counterfeiting techniques, he announced to the assembled federal investigators. Agent Rodriguez briefed Walsh on the 4-hour investigation that had involved 12 security experts and multiple federal agencies, all reaching unanimous conclusions about the fraudulent nature of Elena's credentials. Every authentication system has failed to verify the Level 9 classification, and our technical analysis confirms the documentation contains fictional security elements. Elena observed the escalating federal response through the waiting room's reinforced window, noting the arrival of additional government vehicles and personnel while maintaining the same composed demeanor she had displayed throughout the intensive investigation. Her briefcase remained unopened on the security conveyor, its contents still unknown pending completion of the authentication process. Walsh contacted the Director of National Intelligence to brief him on the unprecedented sophistication of the credential fraud and request authorization for using the most classified authentication systems available to federal investigators. The case has potential implications for national security given the advanced techniques employed by the perpetrators, he explained during the secure communication. Senior investigator Davis attempted verification using quantum encryption protocols designed for authenticating credentials of personnel operating in the most sensitive government positions, systems so classified that their existence was known only to highest-level counterintelligence personnel. The quantum systems are producing identical authentication failures, he reported after completing the specialized verification process. Chief Eldridge coordinated with facility security to accommodate the expanding federal investigation, recognizing that the attempted breach had become a matter of significant government interest. The Pentagon has requested detailed briefings on the new forgery techniques, and the CIA wants copies of all authentication data for their technical analysis division. Director Henley reviewed the comprehensive evidence gathered during the investigation, satisfied that her facility's security team had properly identified and contained what federal experts confirmed was an extraordinary threat to classified government installations. The documentation quality suggests access to manufacturing capabilities that exceed most international counterfeiting operations, she noted during her briefing with Assistant Director Walsh. Walsh examined the detailed scanner error codes generated during multiple authentication attempts, recognizing patterns that didn't conform to any known counterfeiting techniques documented in federal databases. These particular error signatures suggest the perpetrators have developed new encoding methods specifically designed to confuse government authentication systems, he observed while studying the technical data. Security analyst Kelly presented her expanded research to the federal investigators, documenting searches through the most classified government databases that confirmed Level 9 access had never existed in any official capacity throughout the history of federal security frameworks. The classification level appears to be completely fabricated, she reported while displaying comprehensive historical security data. Rodriguez attempted authentication using emergency protocols designed for wartime scenarios, accessing systems that could theoretically verify credentials for personnel operating under the most extreme security circumstances. Even the emergency wartime protocols cannot authenticate this documentation, he confirmed after completing the specialized verification attempts. Jenkins provided his final expert assessment to Assistant Director Walsh, emphasizing that 3 decades of document fraud examination from multiple federal agencies had never produced a case demonstrating such sophisticated counterfeiting techniques. The financial resources and technical capabilities required to produce this documentation suggest organized criminal activity with potential foreign government backing. Walsh authorized the use of the most advanced authentication technology available to federal investigators, equipment so sensitive that it required special clearance even for counterintelligence personnel to operate. This represents our most sophisticated verification capability, he explained while connecting the specialized system to Elena's identification. Davis documented the federal investigation's comprehensive findings for transmission to FBI headquarters and other relevant government agencies, noting that every available authentication method had confirmed the fraudulent nature of Elena's credentials. The case demonstrates counterfeiting sophistication that exceeds our previous experience with international fraud operations. Morrison coordinated with federal authorities to prepare for Elena's formal arrest and transfer to federal custody, recognizing that the sophisticated nature of the credential fraud would require specialized prosecution by counterintelligence experts. The evidence gathered during the investigation provides overwhelming proof of attempted infiltration using extraordinarily advanced fraudulent documentation. Assistant Director Walsh completed his preliminary assessment for FBI headquarters, documenting the unprecedented nature of the credential fraud and recommending expanded investigation into the criminal organization responsible for producing such sophisticated counterfeit government identification. The case represents a significant development in threats to classified facility security, he concluded in his detailed report. Elena remained seated in the secure waiting room, occasionally glancing at her watch as the investigation approached its 5th hour, yet showing no signs of distress or concern about the intensive federal response to her credentials that 13 security experts were absolutely certain represented the most sophisticated fraud attempt in their collective decades of experience. The morning sun had shifted position significantly, casting different shadows across the checkpoint area where the most advanced authentication technology available to the federal government prepared for what investigators expected to be the final confirmation of elaborate criminal fraud. Technical specialist Chun arrived from the National Security Agency, carrying the most advanced credential authentication system in the federal government's possession, equipment so classified that its transportation required armed escort and special authorization from the highest levels of intelligence leadership. The quantum encrypted verification device represented technology developed specifically for authenticating credentials of personnel operating in the most sensitive government positions. Assistant Director Walsh supervised the setup of the specialized authentication equipment, recognizing that this represented the federal government's ultimate verification capability for identifying sophisticated credential fraud. If this system cannot authenticate the documentation, he explained to the assembled investigators, then we have definitive proof of the most advanced counterfeiting operation ever attempted against classified government facilities. Elena was escorted from the waiting room to witness the final authentication attempt, federal protocol requiring the subject's presence during the deployment of the most sophisticated verification technology available to counterintelligence personnel. Her composed demeanor remained unchanged despite being surrounded by 14 security experts who had reached unanimous conclusions about her credentials' fraudulent nature. Technical specialist Chun connected the quantum verification system to Elena's identification, the device immediately beginning complex authentication protocols that accessed the most classified databases maintained by federal intelligence agencies. The system's processing capabilities exceeded anything available to standard security personnel, designed specifically for investigating the most sophisticated threats to national security. Walsh observed the authentication process with the confidence of someone whose 28 years of counterintelligence experience had never encountered a counterfeit credential capable of deceiving the federal government's most advanced verification technology. This system has successfully identified every sophisticated fraud attempt in its operational history, he informed the assembled security personnel. Chief Eldridge documented the final authentication attempt for inclusion in the Comprehensive Security Incident Report, noting that the federal government's ultimate verification capability was being deployed to confirm what 13 experts had already established through extensive investigation. The evidence gathered during the 5-hour investigation provides overwhelming proof of sophisticated credential fraud. The quantum authentication system processed Elena's identification through multiple verification protocols, accessing databases so classified that their existence was known only to the highest levels of government security personnel. Technical specialist Chun monitored the complex authentication sequence, expecting the immediate fraud confirmation that would conclude the intensive federal investigation. Agent Rodriguez coordinated with federal prosecutors to prepare charges related to the sophisticated credential fraud, recognizing that the advanced counterfeiting techniques would require specialized prosecution by counterintelligence experts. The evidence demonstrates attempted infiltration of classified facilities using extraordinarily sophisticated fraudulent documentation. Senior investigator Davis reviewed the comprehensive case file, documenting 5 hours of investigation by multiple federal agencies, satisfied that the quantum verification system would provide the final confirmation needed to conclude what had become a matter of significant national security interest. Every available authentication method has confirmed the fraudulent nature of the documentation. Director Henley observed the final verification attempt alongside facility security personnel, recognizing that the sophisticated fraud attempt had attracted attention from the highest levels of federal law enforcement and intelligence agencies. The case demonstrates new levels of sophistication in threats to classified government installations. Technical specialist Chun monitored the quantum system's processing indicators, noting the complex authentication sequence required for verifying credentials at the highest levels of government security clearance. The system accesses verification databases that exceed standard federal authentication capabilities, he explained while observing the specialized equipment's operation. Walsh contacted FBI headquarters to provide real-time updates on the final authentication attempt, recognizing that the case had implications for security protocols at classified facilities nationwide. The quantum verification represents our ultimate capability for identifying sophisticated credential fraud, he reported during the secure communication. Jenkins observed the quantum authentication process with professional interest, noting that the specialized technology exceeded anything available during his 3 decades of document fraud examination for federal agencies. This system represents authentication capabilities that were unimaginable when I began investigating credential fraud for the Secret Service, he commented while watching the complex verification sequence. Elena stood quietly beside the authentication equipment, her hands clasped in front of her, showing no signs of nervousness or concern despite being the subject of the most intensive credential fraud investigation in recent federal history. The morning had evolved into afternoon, yet her composed demeanor remained unchanged throughout the escalating federal response. Security analyst Kelly documented the quantum system's technical specifications for inclusion in the facility's security protocols, recognizing that exposure to the federal government's most advanced authentication technology represented valuable training for facility security personnel. The quantum verification capabilities exceed anything available through standard government authentication systems. Technical specialist Chun completed the system's initial processing phase, noting that the quantum authentication protocols required additional time for accessing the most classified verification databases maintained by federal intelligence agencies. The system's processing complexity reflects the sophisticated nature of the authentication requirements for highest-level government credentials. Davis coordinated with federal authorities to maintain scene security during the final authentication attempt, recognizing that the deployment of quantum verification technology required specialized protocols for protecting classified authentication capabilities. The equipment represents some of the most sensitive technology available to federal counterintelligence personnel. Assistant Director Walsh reviewed the comprehensive evidence gathered during the investigation, confident that the quantum verification system would provide definitive confirmation of what 14 security experts had established through extensive examination using every available authentication method. The case represents the most sophisticated credential fraud attempt documented in federal databases, requiring deployment of our ultimate verification technology to provide final confirmation of the fraudulent documentation. The quantum authentication system emitted a series of tones that technical specialist Chun had never heard during his 8 years of operating the federal government's most advanced verification technology. Instead of the expected immediate fraud confirmation, the device displayed processing indicators suggesting it was accessing authentication databases that exceeded even his highest-level security clearance. Chun frowned at the display screen, watching authentication protocols engage that he hadn't seen during hundreds of previous fraud investigations. The system is requesting access to verification databases beyond my operational parameters, he reported to Assistant Director Walsh with growing uncertainty. These authentication levels weren't covered in my technical training for the quantum verification system. Assistant Director Walsh approached the authentication equipment with 28 years of counterintelligence experience, suddenly confronted by system responses that didn't match any known credential fraud patterns. The quantum system is designed to immediately identify counterfeit documentation, he stated with decreasing confidence. These processing delays are completely unprecedented in the device's operational history. Elena observed the growing confusion among the federal investigators as their ultimate authentication technology produced responses that contradicted their unanimous conclusions about her credentials' fraudulent nature. Her composed demeanor remained unchanged, but she noticed the subtle shift in atmosphere as certainty began transforming into bewilderment among the assembled security experts. Senior Investigator Davis contacted NSA headquarters to request technical support for the unusual authentication patterns being generated by the quantum verification system. The device is accessing databases that exceed our standard operational protocols, he explained during the secure communication. We need guidance on interpreting authentication results that fall outside normal fraud investigation parameters. Technical specialist Chun attempted to override the system's authentication sequence to force the expected fraud confirmation, but the quantum device continued processing through verification protocols that seemed to recognize Elena's identification as requiring specialized authentication procedures. The system won't accept manual override commands, he reported with growing concern about equipment that was behaving contrary to all previous operational experience. Chief Eldridge watched the federal investigators' growing uncertainty with professional interest, noting that their absolute confidence about Elena's credential fraud was beginning to waver as the government's most sophisticated authentication technology produced unexpected results. The quantum system's responses don't match any known counterfeit patterns, he observed while studying the complex display readings. Agent Rodriguez contacted FBI headquarters to request additional technical expertise for interpreting quantum authentication results that exceeded the experience of personnel trained to operate the federal government's most advanced verification equipment. The system appears to be authenticating credentials through protocols that weren't documented in our operational manuals, he reported during the increasingly urgent secure communication. Director Henley observed the mounting confusion among federal investigators who had arrived with absolute certainty about the sophisticated fraud they were investigating, only to encounter authentication responses that challenged their unanimous conclusions. The quantum verification system was designed to provide definitive fraud confirmation, yet it continued processing Elena's credentials through increasingly complex authentication sequences. Walsh attempted to contact the Director of National Intelligence for guidance on handling authentication results that exceeded the operational experience of the federal government's most experienced counterintelligence personnel. The quantum system is producing verification patterns that fall outside our documented fraud investigation protocols, he explained during the secure communication to intelligence leadership. Technical specialist Chun studied the authentication display with growing realization that 8 years of operating the quantum verification system hadn't prepared him for the complex protocols now engaging to process Elena's identification. The system is accessing authentication databases that require security clearances beyond my operational authorization, he admitted to Assistant Director Walsh. Security analyst Kelly documented the unprecedented authentication patterns for inclusion in what had become the most unusual security incident in the facility's operational history. The quantum system's responses contradict every established pattern for identifying sophisticated credential fraud, she noted while recording the complex verification sequence that continued to confound federal investigators. Davis reviewed the comprehensive case file, documenting 5 hours of investigation by 14 security experts, all of whom had reached unanimous conclusions about Elena's credential fraud based on extensive examination using every available authentication method, except the quantum system, now producing results that challenge their collective expertise. Jenkins observed the federal investigators mounting uncertainty with professional fascination, recognizing that his 3 decades of document fraud examination for multiple federal agencies hadn't included encounter with authentication technology that behaved contrary to all established fraud identification patterns. The quantum system appears to recognize something that standard authentication methods cannot detect. Assistant Director Walsh contacted quantum technology developers at the National Security Agency to request emergency consultation for interpreting verification results that exceeded the operational experience of federal personnel trained to use the government's most advanced authentication equipment. The system is processing credentials through protocols that weren't included in our technical documentation. Elena remained standing beside the authentication equipment, her hands still clasped in front of her, watching 14 security experts and federal investigators confront the possibility that their unanimous conclusions about sophisticated credential fraud might require reconsideration based on authentication technology that was revealing information beyond their collective expertise and experience. Technical specialist Chun attempted additional manual interventions to force the quantum system toward expected fraud confirmation, but the device continued its complex authentication sequence with increasing sophistication, accessing verification databases that seemed to exist beyond the operational parameters of even the federal government's most experienced counterintelligence personnel. The quantum authentication system's display screen illuminated with verification codes that technical specialist Chun had never encountered in 8 years of operating the federal government's most advanced credential technology. Authentication confirmed, the device announced through speakers that had remained silent during hundreds of previous fraud investigations. Level 9 access verified through quantum encryption protocols. Chun stared at the display in complete bewilderment, his hands frozen over the authentication equipment as the implications of the verification results challenged everything he understood about government security classifications. The system is confirming authentication through protocols that shouldn't exist, he whispered to Assistant Director Walsh, his voice barely audible above the stunned silence that had descended over the checkpoint area. Assistant Director Walsh approached the quantum system's display with 28 years of counterintelligence experience suddenly rendered inadequate by authentication results that contradicted every established principle of federal security frameworks. Level 9 access is confirmed as legitimate. He read from the screen with growing disbelief. Executive override authorization verified through classified quantum databases. Elena stepped forward calmly. Her composed demeanor finally explained as the quantum verification system provided authentication that 14 security experts had spent 5 hours proving impossible. As I mentioned earlier, the verification protocols for certain classification levels require additional authentication that can only be accessed through specialized systems. Senior Investigator Davis contacted FBI headquarters with trembling hands, his secure communication reflecting the shock of discovering that their comprehensive fraud investigation had been examining legitimate credentials that exceeded the authentication capabilities of standard federal security systems. Sir, the quantum verification has confirmed Level 9 access as authentic through classified protocols that we weren't aware existed. Technical specialist Chun attempted to process the authentication results through his understanding of government security frameworks, but the quantum system's verification challenged fundamental assumptions about the highest levels of federal classification. The system is accessing authentication databases that were never included in my operational training, he admitted while studying verification codes that confirmed Elena's credentials were genuine. Chief Eldridge examined the quantum system's display with growing realization that his facility's security team had attained someone whose actual authority level exceeded anything in their operational experience. The verification confirms that Level 9 access exists within classified government frameworks that standard security personnel aren't authorized to authenticate. Agent Rodriguez reviewed the comprehensive evidence gathered during the 5-hour investigation. Recognizing that every conclusion reached by 14 security experts had been based on incomplete understanding of the highest levels of government security classification. Our entire investigation was conducted without knowledge of authentication protocols that exceed standard federal security frameworks. Director Henley approached Elena with the professional demeanor of someone whose facility had unknowingly detained a government official whose actual authority level had been beyond their capability to verify through standard authentication methods. Ma'am, I apologize for the extended detention. Our security protocols weren't designed to handle classification levels that exceed our standard verification capabilities. Walsh contacted the Director of National Intelligence to report the extraordinary discovery that Level 9 access represented legitimate government classification that existed within quantum encrypted databases beyond the operational knowledge of standard counterintelligence personnel. Sir, we've confirmed the existence of security classifications that exceed our documented federal frameworks. The quantum authentication system continued displaying verification results that provided detailed information about Elena's actual government position and authority level, information that had been inaccessible through every standard authentication method employed during the comprehensive federal investigation. Executive override authorization confirmed for Dr. Elena Vasquez, Director of Classified Operations. Security analyst Kelly documented the quantum verification results with growing understanding that her extensive database research had been limited to authentication systems that lacked access to the highest levels of government security classification. The classified databases accessed by the quantum system contain security frameworks that exceed standard federal documentation. Jenkins observed the transformation of the investigation with professional fascination, recognizing that his 3 decades of document fraud examination had never included encounter with legitimate credentials that required quantum authentication protocols beyond the scope of standard federal security systems. This represents government classification levels that exceed our operational knowledge. Davis attempted to process the implications of discovering that their sophisticated fraud investigation had been examining legitimate credentials for a government official whose actual authority level had been beyond their capability to authenticate through standard federal protocols. Every conclusion we reached was based on incomplete understanding of classified security frameworks. Technical specialist Shun reviewed the quantum system's detailed authentication report, noting that Elena's credentials included access authorizations and security clearances that exceeded anything documented in standard federal training materials. The quantum verification reveals classification levels and executive authorities that weren't covered in our operational education. Assistant Director Walsh examined the comprehensive authentication results with growing realization that the federal government maintained security classification levels that exceeded the operational knowledge of even experienced counterintelligence personnel. Level 9 access represents government authority that exists beyond our standard investigative protocols. Elena retrieved her identification from the quantum authentication system. Her calm demeanor throughout the 5-hour investigation, now completely explained by credentials that had been legitimate from the beginning but required verification through classified systems beyond the scope of standard federal security protocols. Technical specialist Chun stared at the quantum system's additional verification data streaming across the display screen. His 8 years of operating federal authentication technology suddenly inadequate for comprehending the scope of authority revealed by Elena's legitimate credentials. Director of Classified Operations with executive oversight for multi-agency security protocols. He read aloud, his voice reflecting the disbelief of discovering government positions that exceeded his operational knowledge. Assistant Director Walsh examined the detailed authentication report with growing realization that Elena's actual authority level placed her significantly higher in federal hierarchy than his own position within FBI counterintelligence. The quantum verification indicates supervisory authority over classified operations that include oversight of federal security investigations. He reported to FBI headquarters with obvious embarrassment about detaining someone whose government rank exceeded his own. Elena retrieved her briefcase from the security conveyor belt, her movements deliberate and professional as 14 security experts and federal investigators watched with the stunned recognition that they had spent 5 hours investigating someone whose actual job included supervising the very security protocols they had been attempting to enforce. Chief Eldridge approached Elena with the formal respect due to a government official whose authority level had been revealed to exceed anything in his facility's operational experience. Director Vasquez, I must apologize for the extended detention and request guidance on proper protocols for processing credentials that require quantum authentication beyond our standard security capabilities. Senior Investigator Davis contacted FBI headquarters to report the extraordinary conclusion of what had become the most unusual security investigation in his 15 years of counterintelligence work. Sir, we have confirmed that Dr. Elena Vasquez holds director-level authority over classified operations that include supervisory oversight of federal security investigations and authentication protocols. Director Henley examined the quantum authentication results with professional mortification, recognizing that her facility had unknowingly detained a government official whose actual authority included oversight responsibilities for the very security measures that had been used to question her credentials. The verification indicates executive authority over classified research facility security protocols. Elena opened her briefcase for the first time during the 6-hour ordeal, retrieving documents that bore security classifications and authorization stamps that none of the assembled personnel had encountered during their collective decades of federal security experience. These facility inspection reports require completion by end of business today, she explained calmly, while displaying documentation that carried classification levels beyond standard government frameworks. Technical specialist Chun continued studying the quantum verification data, noting security clearances and executive authorizations that seemed to encompass oversight responsibilities for the very authentication systems he operated. The verification indicates supervisory authority over quantum authentication protocols and federal security technology deployment. He reported with growing understanding of the implications. Agent Rodriguez reviewed his case notes with the professional embarrassment of someone whose comprehensive fraud investigation had been conducted against a government official whose actual job included supervisory oversight of federal security investigations. The authentication confirms authority over multi-agency counterintelligence operations and classified facility security protocols. Walsh examined Elena's inspection documents with recognition that the facility visit they had prevented through their investigation was actually a scheduled oversight inspection by someone whose authority included evaluation of federal security effectiveness. Director Vasquez, these documents indicate you were conducting official evaluation of our security response protocols. Security analyst Kelly approached Elena with obvious professional mortification, carrying the comprehensive research that had convinced her Level 9 access didn't exist within federal frameworks. Ma'am, I need to apologize for my database research conclusions. The classification levels you hold exist within quantum encrypted systems that exceed our standard research capabilities. Jenkins observed the transformation of the security situation with professional fascination, recognizing that his 3 decades of document fraud examination had culminated in investigating legitimate credentials for someone whose authority included oversight of the very fraud detection protocols he had spent his career implementing. Davis documented the investigation's conclusion for federal records, noting that their comprehensive examination had inadvertently provided Elena with detailed observation of facility security response capabilities during an official oversight inspection. The entire investigation became part of the security evaluation process we were attempting to prevent. Elena reviewed the quantum authentication results displayed on the system screen, noting the complete verification of credentials that had been legitimate throughout the 6-hour investigation. The delayed authentication provided valuable assessment of facility security response to unfamiliar classification levels, she observed while examining her inspection documentation. Director Henley realized that Elena's calm demeanor during the extended detention had reflected not only legitimate credentials, but also professional evaluation of security protocols during an official inspection of facility readiness. Your patience during our authentication procedures provided comprehensive assessment of our security response capabilities under pressure. Technical specialist Chun examined his authentication equipment with new understanding that the complex protocols engaged by Elena's credentials represented security technology designed specifically for verifying authority levels that exceeded standard federal operational knowledge. The quantum system accessed verification databases that exist beyond our documented authentication capabilities. Assistant Director Walsh reviewed the comprehensive case file with growing realization that their sophisticated fraud investigation had been conducted under the direct observation of a government official whose actual authority included evaluation of federal security effectiveness and counterintelligence response protocols. The entire investigation provided inadvertent demonstration of federal security capabilities during official oversight inspection. Elena closed her briefcase and approached the checkpoint exit, her 6-hour facility inspection having provided comprehensive evaluation of security response protocols through the most thorough testing of authentication procedures in the facility's operational history. Chief Eldridge stood at attention as Elena approached the checkpoint exit, his 23 years of facility security experience having been fundamentally transformed by discovering that government authority levels existed beyond his operational knowledge. Director Vasquez, he said with formal respect, your inspection has provided comprehensive evaluation of our security response capabilities. I request permission to implement procedural improvements based on today's assessment. Elena paused at the metal detector that had begun her 6-hour evaluation of facility security protocols, noting the complete transformation in demeanor among 14 security experts who had spent the morning investigating credentials that had been legitimate throughout their comprehensive examination. Chief Eldridge, your team demonstrated exactly the thorough response protocols that classified facilities require when encountering unfamiliar authentication requirements. Assistant Director Walsh approached Elena with the professional courtesy due to a government official whose authority had been revealed to exceed his own position within federal law enforcement hierarchy. Director Vasquez, I must commend your patience during our investigation. Your inspection methodology provided invaluable assessment of multi-agency security response coordination under pressure. Technical specialist Chun disconnected the quantum authentication system with new understanding that his 8 years of operating federal verification technology had been enhanced by encountering credentials that required access to classified databases beyond his previous operational experience. Ma'am, today's authentication process expanded my knowledge of quantum verification capabilities that I didn't know existed within our systems. Elena retrieved her facility inspection checklist from her briefcase, reviewing assessment criteria that had been comprehensively tested through the most thorough security response examination in the facility's operational history. The authentication delays provided complete evaluation of personnel training, interagency coordination, and escalation protocols under realistic pressure conditions. Director Henley accompanied Elena toward the facility entrance, her professional respect reflecting recognition that the extended detention had actually represented an official inspection conducted by someone whose authority included oversight of classified research facility security effectiveness. Your evaluation methodology provided assessment opportunities that standard inspections cannot replicate. Security analyst Kelly approached Elena with obvious professional growth from encountering classification levels that had expanded her understanding of federal security frameworks beyond anything covered in her previous training and experience. Director Vasquez, today's research expanded my knowledge of government databases that exist beyond standard authentication systems. Elena paused at the facility entrance, turning to address the assembled security personnel who had transformed from confident fraud investigators into respectful colleagues recognizing authority that exceeded their operational knowledge. Your response protocols demonstrated exactly the thoroughness and interagency coordination that classified facilities require when encountering unfamiliar security challenges. Agent Rodriguez documented the investigation's conclusion with professional appreciation for learning opportunities provided by Elena's inspection methodology, recognizing that his counterintelligence experience had been enhanced by encountering legitimate credentials that required authentication beyond standard federal protocols. Today's investigation provided valuable training in recognizing classification levels that exceed our documented frameworks. Jenkins observed Elena's departure with professional satisfaction from a career culminating in examination of legitimate credentials that had tested every aspect of his document fraud expertise, while ultimately expanding his understanding of government security classifications that existed beyond his previous knowledge. Elena walked through the facility entrance that had been the starting point of her comprehensive security assessment, her inspection having provided evaluation of response protocols through the most realistic testing scenario possible. The facility security response exceeded expectations for handling unfamiliar classification levels requiring specialized authentication. Chief Eldridge coordinated with his security team to implement procedural improvements based on Elena's inspection findings, recognizing that their comprehensive response had provided valuable training while revealing areas for enhancement in handling credentials requiring quantum authentication protocols. Assistant Director Walsh contacted FBI headquarters to report the extraordinary learning experience provided by Elena's inspection methodology, noting that the investigation had enhanced federal understanding of classification levels and authentication protocols that existed beyond standard counterintelligence operational knowledge. Elena completed her facility inspection documentation while walking toward her government vehicle, noting that the 6-hour security response had provided comprehensive assessment data that would inform improvements to classified facility protocols nationwide. The thorough authentication process demonstrated excellent interagency coordination and escalation procedures. Technical specialist Chun reviewed the quantum authentication logs with enhanced understanding of verification capabilities that had been expanded through Elena's inspection, recognizing that his operational knowledge had been significantly enhanced by encountering credentials that required access to classified databases beyond his previous experience. Director Henley watched Elena's departure with professional respect for inspection methodology that had provided realistic assessment of facility security capabilities through testing scenarios that standard evaluations could not replicate. The extended authentication process had revealed both strengths and improvement opportunities in facility security protocols. Elena reached her vehicle as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the facility courtyard, her comprehensive inspection having been completed through the most thorough testing of security response protocols in the facility's operational history. The authentication challenges had provided valuable assessment of personnel training and interagency coordination effectiveness. Security personnel returned to their normal checkpoint operations with enhanced understanding of government classification levels and authentication requirements that existed beyond their previous operational knowledge, their professional growth having been facilitated through Elena's patient inspection methodology. If this story moved you, drop a comment about what resonated most with you, or share if you've witnessed similar moments where someone's true authority was revealed after initial doubt. Your favorite moment or character would be great to hear about too. Elena drove away from the facility with completed inspection documentation that would inform improvements to classified facility security protocols nationwide, her 6-hour evaluation having provided comprehensive assessment through the most realistic testing scenario possible for government security response capabilities.